He led them to the grave of a girl no one remembered, then died the next morning, lying silent where the mirror used to hang. No one had ever spoken her name. She was erased from records, buried in woods without a marker. But Shadow, the German shepherd, remembered. He scratched at walls, barked at silence, and uncovered a truth buried for generations, that the family's forgotten child hadn't vanished, and he, somehow, knew where to find her. This isn't just a story about a dog. It's about what he remembered when no one else did. Like this story, if it shook something in you, subscribe to follow the trail he left behind. And tell us what you think he saw behind the mirror. Malik Harper hated the hallway at dawn. Not because it was dark or cold or haunted, at least not in the ghostish kind of way, but because it felt too full of something unseen, a kind of pressure, like the air didn't quite move right. Every morning since the last leaves dropped from the pecan tree outside, Shadow, his black and tan Georgian shepherd, would get up before sunrise, trot down the hardwood hallway of their aging Georgian farmhouse, and sit directly in front of the full-length mirror. That mirror had been there for decades. Long before Malik was born, it had a thick oak frame, faded varnish, and a faint crack running diagonally across the top right corner like a forgotten scar. It belonged to his father. Everything in that hallway once did. The Shadow didn't bark. He didn't growl or whimper. He just stared. Sometimes he'd lift one paw, press it gently to the mirror, and hold it there as if waiting for the glass to yield. Other times he'd scratched at it lightly, 3 quick swipes, and then stillness again. And Malik, 17, curious, frustrated, and tired of feeling like he was losing his mind, had started watching too. He'd wake up early, sometimes on purpose, sometimes not, and creep down the steps in socks, the wood creaking under his weight no matter how soft he tried to move. The first few mornings, Malik thought it was a phase. Shadow was grieving. They both were. It had only been 4 months since the funeral. Malik's father, Jeremiah Harper, a quiet man with deep thoughts and a deeper silence, had passed in his sleep. No warning, no last words, just gone. Aunt Rochelle, his mother, had said it was peaceful. He left like he lived, she'd whispered over oatmeal one morning, with stillness. But Malik didn't think it felt peaceful. Not with all the questions left behind. Not with that damn mirror catching light at weird angles. Not with Shadow waking up like clockwork to stare into it. One particular morning, when the fog clung low over the fields behind the house, and the whole world seemed to hold its breath, Malik stepped into the hallway and froze. Shadow was already there, of course, but this time something was different. The dog's body was tense, more alert than usual, and his ears pointed not forward, but slightly to the side, as if he was hearing something that didn't belong. His tail didn't wag. It didn't even twitch. Malik's heart skipped. He called out softly, "Hey, boy." Shadow didn't turn. Malik stepped closer, glancing into the mirror like he had dozens of times before. But his breath caught halfway through his chest. In the reflection, the hallway stretched behind him, the light above flickering just as it did in real life. He saw the framed family photo near the stair. He saw his own face, shadowed by sleep. And he saw the outline of the dog beside him, except it wasn't complete. Shadow's reflection was missing its front leg, no, its entire front half. From the chest forward, the mirror just showed the hallway. Empty. Malik blinked, looked again. The reflection shimmered faintly like heat waves on a road, then settled back into normal. He crouched beside his dog, resting a hand on Shadow's thick neck. The fur was warm, solid, real. He whispered, "What are you seeing, boy?" But he looked at Malik then, just once, and in his dark eyes was something more than canine instinct, something Malik didn't want to name. Later that day, Malik mentioned it to Aunt Rochelle while she was kneading dough at the kitchen counter. She paused, flour in her hands. "That mirror's old," she said finally. "Your daddy got it from his granddaddy, said it always gave him strange dreams." She dusted her palms off and added, "Maybe it's time we took it down." But they didn't, and Shadow kept returning to it. Every morning, Malik started recording the sessions on his phone, just 10-minute clips. The dog staring, scratching, whining once, always before sunrise. On the 5th morning, while reviewing the video, Malik noticed something else. In the reflection, a figure moved behind him. Brief, fast, gone before he turned. But it was there. He ran up to his room, pulled the curtains shut, and sat on his bed. the phone trembling in his hand. His father had died in this house. His scent still clung to his old jacket hanging by the back door. His old records still sat untouched in the den. But something wasn't letting go. That night, Malik couldn't sleep. At 3:11 a.m., he walked down the hallway barefoot, the mirror dimly glowing in the dark like a door left ajar. Shadow sat waiting. This time, Malik sat beside him. The two stared together. Nothing happened. No shadow, no ghost, no trick of the light. Just two figures, a boy and his dog, watching a version of themselves that felt not entirely their own. He reached out and pressed his palm against the glass next to Shadow's paw. The surface was cold, colder than the room around them, and as Malik leaned closer, he whispered, "If you're still here, say something." But the mirror said nothing, only his own breath fogged it up. Then, slowly, Shadow stood. He stepped away from the glass, tail low, ears back. And Malik noticed something. On the floor, beneath where Shadow had been sitting, 3 faint scratches had appeared in the wood. Parallel. Recent. The next morning, Malik didn't go to school. He borrowed Aunt Rochelle's keys and drove into town. At the hardware store, he asked for a stud finder, a flashlight, and a pry bar. The old man behind the counter asked if he was finally helping with the renovations. Malik said yes, but what he meant was, "I think something's hiding in my house." The morning after Malik returned from the hardware store, the hallway lights began to flicker. At first, he thought it was coincidence. Maybe the wiring was old, or the bulb loose, but the pattern was too specific to ignore. Every time Shadow walked into the hallway and stood near the mirror, the ceiling light above would dim, then buzz faintly, then blink once, twice, 3 times. Aunt Rochelle noticed it that same evening when she passed through on her way to the laundry room. "You see this?" she asked, looking up as the light gave its little electric stutter. Malik nodded, arms crossed, leaning against the doorway. "Yeah, it's been doing that." She squinted at the fixture, sighed, then went to the basement and flipped the breaker off. "We'll have to call somebody," she muttered. "I don't want this house catching fire on top of everything else." But Malik wasn't so sure it was the wiring. That night, after Rochelle had gone to bed and the house had settled into its usual creaks and sighs, Malik waited until 2:47 a.m., the time when Shadow usually stirred. And, like clockwork, the dog rose from his spot at the foot of Malik's bed, padded softly toward the hallway, and stood still in front of the mirror. The light, despite the breaker being off, gave one faint glow, just enough to outline Shadow's shape in a halo of golden weight. Then darkness again. Malik froze in the doorway, holding his breath. He didn't speak. Shadow growled once low, barely audible, then sat. In that moment, the air felt charged, as if the walls themselves were listening. Malik reached into his hoodie pocket, pulled out the small flashlight he'd bought, and flicked it on. The beam hit the mirror's surface and revealed a faint smear that hadn't been there before, right where Shadow had placed his paw the morning before. It was curved almost like a fingerprint but stretched. Instinctively, Malik touched it. The glass was cold again and slightly rough where the smear was. Not like a smudge, but like it had been etched. As he leaned in closer, his breath caught when he noticed a thin line running down the lower corner of the mirror's frame. A crack. Not deep, not dangerous yet, but definitely new. The last time he'd checked, the mirror had only had that one old chip near the top corner. This was fresh. Shadow whined, then, without warning, he barked a single, sharp, desperate sound that echoed down the hallway and made Malik's skin crawl. Malik flinched back, flashlight beam jerking upward. The mirror pulsed just for a second, as if something behind the glass had moved. And then it happened. A faint snapping sound like wood splintering under pressure. A crack spiderwebbed out from the bottom right corner of the mirror. Malik stepped forward, his hand trembling slightly as he raised the flashlight again. There, caught between the layers of the frame and backing, was a piece of paper. It looked yellowed, brittle. The edge peeked out like a secret trying to escape. Malik crouched, careful not to disturb Shadow, who remained completely still. Using the corner of his pocket knife, he gently pried the frame open just enough to grip the edge of the paper. It came out slower than he expected, like it didn't want to be disturbed. The paper was thin, fragile with age, and folded tightly in thirds. Malik unfolded it slowly, eyes scanning the surface. The writing was faint, Graphite smudged as if it had been scribbled in haste and hidden in fear. Only one line was legible. "Don't bury this again." Malik stared at it, heart pounding, mouth suddenly dry. There was no signature, no date, just that warning. He looked at Shadow. The dog's gaze was fixed on the mirror still, ears perked, body tense. "Don't bury what?" Malik whispered. He turned the note over, hoping for more. Nothing. He brought it close to the flashlight beam, angling it, hoping to catch a watermark or hidden ink. Still nothing. He tucked it into his hoodie pocket and stood slowly. "Come on, boy," he said softly. Shadow didn't move. Shadow? Still nothing. Malik stepped beside him, gently placed a hand on the dog's back. At the touch, Shadow blinked and let out a soft breath through his nose, then turned and, in the morning, he showed the paper to Aunt Rochelle. She turned it over in her hands like it might crumble, brow furrowed deep. "Where did you find this?" she asked. "Behind the mirror," Malik replied. It was stuck inside the frame. Rochelle said nothing for a long time. Finally, she folded the paper neatly and handed it back. "Your daddy always said that mirror held on to things, memories, energy, dreams. I thought he meant it metaphorically." "Do you think he hid it?" "I don't know," she said quietly. "But if he did, he must have had a reason." Lachette returned to the mirror, this time with the stud finder and crowbar in hand. Shadow sat beside him, eyes never leaving the glass. Malik ran the tool across the wall. Nothing. Then again. Still nothing. But when he tapped lightly on the paneling just beside the mirror's edge, the sound changed. Hollow. He exchanged a glance with Shadow. "I think there's something behind here," he said. He wedged the crowbar under the panel seam and pressed gently, praying the wood wouldn't crack loud enough to wake his mother. The board gave a soft creak, then popped loose just an inch, enough to feel the cool drafts slipping out. Malay pulled the panel open wider, revealing darkness. And then, just as he leaned in, his flashlight beam caught something inside. Fabric, wood, a thin layer of dust, and something else. Something that shimmered briefly. He reached in slowly, fingers brushing something metal cold, tarnished, and unfamiliar. A sudden bang echoed from the opposite end of the house. Malik jumped. Shadow barked loud and deep, turning toward the sound, tail raised. Malik stuffed the paper and flashlight into his hoodie and backed away from the opening, heart thudding. Someone or something had just entered through the back porch. Malik stood frozen, the panel still partially open, Shadow growling low beside him. The noise from the back porch had come and gone, but its echo clung to the air like static. He held his breath, half expecting another sound, a footstep, a creak, but nothing followed. After a long minute, he whispered to Shadow, "Stay," and crept toward the kitchen, bat in hand. The back door remained shut. He checked the lock and it was still engaged. He peeked through the window. Empty yard. No footprints, no movement. Just fog pressing against the glass like a restless dream. He returned to the hallway with caution, heart still pounding, and stared at the mirror with renewed unease. "We need to take it down," he told Shadow, his voice spittier than he felt. Morning light spilled into the house a few hours later. Aunt Rochelle entered the hallway with a cup of tea, still in her robe. Malik was already kneeling in front of the mirror, toolbox open, screwdriver in hand. She gave him a long look, then took a slow sip. "You're really doing it, huh? I need to know what's behind it." She glanced at Shadow, who was pacing in tight, anxious circles. "He's not gonna rest until you do?" Together they removed the mirror. It was heavier than Malik expected. The frame creaked in protest like it knew it was being disturbed after decades of stillness. They lowered it gently to the ground. Behind where it hung, the wall looked ordinary at first, faded paint, a few cobwebs and dust. "Help me here," he said, passing the crowbar to his mother. Rochelle wedged it into the panel's seam and pushed. With a reluctant groan, the wood gave way, revealing a shallow recess. Dust poured out like breath being held too long. Inside, a single object waited, a small, square, dented tin box wrapped in an old white handkerchief. Malik reached in, lifted it carefully, and held it between them. The box was heavier than it looked. He wiped the dust off its lid, fingers trembling. Rochelle sat beside him on the floor, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "Well," she said, "you gonna open it?" He unclasped the rusty latch. The hinge gave a sharp click. Inside, tucked neatly, were several yellowed photographs, a folded slip of paper, and something wrapped in cloth. He lifted the top photo first. It was black and white, a little blurred with age. A man's tall, dark-skinned, strong jawline, broad shoulders held a newborn baby against his chest. The baby's tiny hands clung to his shirt. Malik turned the photo over. On the back, in the same blocky handwriting he'd seen in his dad's old notebooks, were 3 words. For El, always. He swallowed hard. Who's El? Rochelle leaned closer. Her eyes scanned the image. Her face grew still. That's your father, she whispered. But I've never seen that baby before. Malik lifted the cloth next. If Shadow brings you here, he stared at it. Rochelle's hand rose to cover her mouth. Oh my God. Malik stood without a word and went to the den. They still had his father's old tape player tucked in a box under the coffee table. After rummaging through wires and spare batteries, he got it working. The machine whirred softly as he inserted the cassette. Then silence. Then static. Then a voice. It was unmistakably Jeremiah Harper's. Not the way he sounded in life, strong, distant but softer, broken almost. If you're hearing this, the voice said, then Shadow did what I hoped he would. He led you here. That means, you're ready. Rochelle gripped Malik's arm. Your dad recorded this. Keep listening, he whispered. The voice on the tape continued. I never knew how to say this out loud. I was raised on silence, taught that men didn't speak about what hurt them, that some truths did more damage than good. But you deserve the truth, Malik, all of it. Rochelle's eyes were wide, her lips pressed in a tight line. Malik couldn't breathe. The voice dropped lower, almost like Jeremiah was whispering through the walls. The baby in the photo, she was yours in blood, but never in name. Her name was Lillian, your sister, my daughter, but not with your mother. Malik blinked. Rochelle sat up straighter. What? She breathed. The tape crackled again. Her mother, her name was June, was someone I met long before I ever met Rochelle. It wasn't planned, none of it was. We were just 2 kids trying to survive in a world that didn't want people like us to love each other. When she got pregnant, we hid it. Everyone told us it would ruin everything. We believed them. She disappeared one winter. I was told the baby was lost, that there was nothing left to say. But that was a lie. Rochelle covered her face, breath shallow. Malik stared at the tape deck, frozen. If you found the photo, then you found her, Jeremiah's voice said. She was real, and I've looked for her ever since. Every house we lived in, every place I returned to, I searched. He came from a line of service dogs that could track more than scent. They followed grief, silence, memory. I didn't think he'd know, but maybe I underestimated him. Rochelle's tears finally broke. They slid down her cheeks soundless. I'm sorry I never told you, the voice said, now barely above a breath. I wanted to protect what we had, but maybe protecting it kept it from being real. Then the tape stopped. A soft click. Malik didn't move. Rochelle wiped her face, trembling. He lied to me, she whispered. Not just you, Malik replied, all of us. He stared down at the tin box again, the photograph of the baby and the man now resting on top. He wanted to scream. He wanted to ask why, but all he could do was sit there. Shadow pressed against his leg, breathing slow and steady like an anchor in a storm. The day after listening to the cassette tape, Malik couldn't stop replaying his father's voice in his head. It haunted him more than anything he'd heard in that house before. The hallway, now bare without the mirror, felt even more unsettling. At night it seemed longer, quieter, and somehow more alive. Shadow never left it. Every evening, just after the sun dipped below the pecan trees and the house began to cool, Shadow would trot down the stairs and lay in the exact same spot where the mirror once hung. He didn't sleep, he didn't rest, he watched. Sometimes he stared straight ahead at the empty wall. Sometimes he growled low and slow, almost inaudible, the kind of sound that made Malik's chest tighten like the room itself was holding its breath. Aunt Rochelle tried to distract herself by baking more than usual. The scent of cinnamon and brown sugar often drifted from the kitchen late into the night. But Malik stayed near Shadow, a notebook in hand, pen tapping rhythmically against the paper. He didn't know what he was trying to write, memories maybe, or pieces of the truth that hadn't fully surfaced yet. That week, while searching through old storage boxes in the attic for any trace of June or Lillian, he found a crate marked simply, Jeremiah Personal. The handwriting was shaky but familiar. Malik carried it down carefully and opened it on the floor of his room. Inside were odds and ends. A watch, a pair of military dog tags, a worn leather wallet, a stack of envelopes wrapped in twine, and at the bottom, a journal. It wasn't thick. The pages were yellowed at the edges, the cover cracked and soft from age and handling. Malik opened it slowly, heart pounding. The first few pages were mundane logistics, dates, a grocery list, reminders about oil changes and doctor visits. But midway through, the tone shifted. The handwriting grew tighter, more hurried, like Jeremiah had written while wrestling with something he couldn't speak aloud. One entry stopped Malik cold. It read, "I used to believe love was loud, that it looked like anniversaries and holidays, like photographs you put on mantles. But the love I knew with June was different. It was quiet. It existed between silences, in touches no one else saw, in promises whispered into spaces no one else entered. I couldn't keep her. I didn't know how. I chose to survive, and in doing so, I lost her. And I lost the child who never even got my name." Malik closed his eyes. The words cut deep, not because they were surprising, but because they weren't. Somewhere inside, part of him had already known. He turned the page. Another entry, dated 3 years before Jeremiah's death, read, "They told me she was gone, that Lillian never made it. But part of me refuses to believe that. A man like me doesn't get that kind of miracle and then just lets go. I still feel her, like wind through the house when it's supposed to be still, like music playing from rooms I haven't entered. Sometimes Shadow stops and looks into the mirror like he sees her. Maybe he does." Malik gripped the notebook tighter. He felt like he was reading a confession carved into stone. Something meant to be buried but instead left like breadcrumbs. To make the decision hiss. Take the left hand, not the loss, just enough to carry into the silence. Malik rose, the journal in hand, and followed the sound. The hallway was dim, the lamp on the end table flickering like a candle in the wind. Shadow sat exactly where the mirror had hung, staring forward, unmoving. Malik watched his dog's ears twitch toward the stairwell, though no sound came from it. The air was dense, heavy, like before a storm. "What do you see?" Malik asked quietly, crouching beside him. Shadow didn't respond, but his eyes tracked something across the wall, something invisible to Malik. A chill ran down his spine. He reached out and rested his palm against the drywall. It was cold, not in a regular way but in a sharp, unnatural one, as if something behind it was pulling warmth away. He pressed his forehead gently to the surface and whispered, "Lillian?" No answer, but Shadow leaned forward and let out a low, pained whine. Malik opened the journal again, flipping to the final entry. It was short, just a single sentence, written in bold, trembling script. "She's still here, waiting for me to remember." That night, Malik dreamt. In the dream, the house was silent, the kind of quiet that felt wrong. He stood in the hallway, and the mirror was back, pristine and polished, hanging like it had never been touched. Shadow stood beside him, tense, eyes fixed on the glass. Then, a figure appeared inside it, not his reflection, not his mother's, not anyone he recognized. A girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old, with tight curls and eyes like his. She looked directly at him and said nothing. Then she reached out her hand toward him. Through the mirror and behind her, someone whispered, "She's waiting for you." Malik woke drenched in sweat, gasping for air. The hallway was still empty, but Shadow was there, sitting at the bedroom door, staring down the dark corridor. That morning, Malik didn't eat. He didn't speak. He spent hours in the hallway rereading his father's journal, scanning every inch of the wall for more cracks, more openings, more pieces of the past. Around noon, Aunt Rochelle approached, a sandwich in one hand, a damp towel in the other. "You look like hell," she said, kneeling beside him. "Eat something." He took the sandwich but didn't bite. "Did he ever tell you about her?" Rochelle exhaled slowly. "No, not a word. But your daddy, he carried things. Always did, things from before me, things I could never get him to open up about. I thought it was just the war. I didn't know it was." Malik handed her the journal, opened to the page with June's name. She read it, lips tightening, then closed the book. She was his before me, and Lillian, she should have been ours too. Malik looked at the wall again. "I think we're supposed to find her." Rochelle nodded slowly. Then let's start where he left off. Malik stood, shadow rising with him, eyes fixed on the floor where the mirror once rested. Something shifted under his shoe. Faint but distinct. A vibration almost imperceptible, humming through the wood. Malik sat cross-legged on the floor of his room. The photograph of the man and infant laid out flat in front of him beneath the warm circle of his desk lamp. The paper had begun to yellow, but the image remained hauntingly intact. The man's face was strong, dark-skinned, eyes proud but distant, like he was holding something more than just a child, like he was holding a memory he didn't want to let go of. The infant, nestled tightly against the man's chest, had one hand slightly extended toward the camera, fingers tiny and curled. Malik leaned closer, his breath catching. On the baby's left hand, more specifically, on the pinky, was a faint mark, just barely visible through the grainy black and white, a tiny arc-shaped scar at the tip of the finger. The same faint, crescent-shaped scar that he'd always believed came from a bike accident when he was 6. But now, that assumption didn't feel so certain. He pulled out his phone, snapped a high-functioning picture of the baby's hand, and overlaid it beside a picture of his own pinky using a photo app. The resemblance was eerie. It wasn't just similar, it was nearly identical in shape, placement, and length. Malik's pulse quickened. He stared at the man in the photo again, trying to find anything familiar in the deep-set eyes, the jawline, the broad shoulders. For years, Malik had been told he took after his father, and that was mostly true, but there were features that never quite matched, hints in the cheekbones, in the slope of his nose, in the way his hair curled tighter than Jeremiah's ever did. He had always assumed that came from his mother's side, but now he wasn't so sure. The back of the photo read, "For Elle always." But maybe that wasn't just about Lillian. Maybe it was a message sent across generations. Malik's mind wouldn't rest. He had to know for certain. That night, when Rochelle had gone to bed, and the house had fallen into its usual midnight hush, he returned to the tin box and dug deeper into its corners. Behind the fabric liner, he found something stiff. He peeled it back and discovered a small gauze-wrapped bundle inside it. Dried, flaking, but unmistakable, was a piece of what looked like bloodied cloth. At first he recoiled, then his breath stilled. A single smear of dark red remained, old but preserved by time and the sealed environment. He didn't know whose it was, but a hunch told him it could belong to Lillian or June or even the man in the photo. Either way, it was something genetic, something ancient, and it was a start. The next day, Malik skipped school and drove into the city using his savings. He visited a private DNA testing facility, nondescript in a beige office park, hidden among dental clinics and law firms. Inside, the receptionist gave him a clipboard and a short explanation of services. Malik selected the ancestral and familial relation test, declined to list known relatives, and slid a few strands of his own hair into the collection envelope. When the technician asked for the second sample, Malik hesitated, then handed over the cloth fragment sealed in a sterile bag. "It's old," he said, trying to sound casual. "Family heirloom." The woman didn't blink. "We've tested older," she replied, and took it gently from him. Results would take 5 to 7 days. Malik barely slept. Every night, Shadow stayed in the hallway, alert, watchful. Every morning, Malik returned to the photo, to the journal, to the puzzle that was slowly assembling into something too big to ignore. On the 6th day, his phone rang while he and Rochelle were shelling peas on the back porch. He excused himself, heart pounding, and answered in the privacy of his room. The voice on the other end was measured, clinical. "Mr. Harper, the DNA samples you submitted have been successfully processed." Malik clutched the phone tighter. "And? Based on the allelic markers and Y chromosomal profiles, we've determined a direct familial link between the two samples, strong enough to suggest a first-degree relative or grandparental connection." Malik sat down slowly. "So, I'm related to whoever that blood belongs to?" "Yes," the voice confirmed. "The probability exceeds 99.9%. It's a strong paternal line match, likely a His mind reeled. That meant the man in the photo, the man holding the baby, was not just Lillian's father. He was Malik's grandfather, which made Lillian his aunt, which made the family tree tilt at an angle that felt both dizzying and profound. The man in the photo wasn't just someone his father once loved or mourned. He was kin, a missing branch buried in silence. He thanked the woman, hung up, and sat staring at the floor for what felt like an hour. Later, he showed the results to Rochelle. She stared at the printed summary, jaw clenched, silent. Malik watched her eyes scan the paper again and again. "Do you recognize him?" he asked. She shook her head slowly. "Naturally, but I remember hearing your father argue with his own dad a long time ago. Real bad fight. Your grandfather never came back to visit after that. I never knew why." Malik glanced at the photo again. "Maybe this is why." Rochelle sighed. "Maybe he wasn't supposed to exist. Maybe they erased him." Malik whispered, "Then it's our job to remember him." That night, Malik placed the photo in a new frame and set it on the shelf beside the journal and cassette. Shadow sat beside him, tail tapping gently on the floor, watching him like he understood the weight of what had just been uncovered. Malik ran a hand down the dog's back and said softly, "You knew, didn't you?" Shadow didn't move, just blinked slowly, eyes fixed on the framed face of the man none of them had ever spoken about, yet somehow had always been waiting to be found. The following morning, Malik returned to the attic to search for more, armed with a flashlight, gloves, and a restless urgency. The next few days passed in a haze. Malik couldn't focus on school, food, or even sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the face in the photo, heard the voice on the cassette, and felt the weight of history pressing against his chest. The idea that he came from a family bigger and more tangled than he'd ever imagined kept him spinning. But it was more than that now. Something deeper was pulling at him, a thread that refused to be ignored. Shadow had been restless too. He no longer waited for dawn to claim his post in the hallway. Now he stayed up most of the night, pacing between windows and doors, his ears twitching, body tense. Something was shifting. Malik could feel it. On a Saturday morning painted in the gold of early fall, Malik stepped onto the back porch with a thermos of coffee and watched as Shadow stood at the tree line behind their property. Unmoving, nose tilted to the wind, the woods were quiet. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that felt like something had just slipped out of view. Malik stepped off the porch and walked toward Shadow. The dog turned, gave a low woof, then started walking toward a part of the forest they rarely visited. Malik followed, mug still in hand, not knowing why but trusting the moment. The trail was barely a trail, more like a memory of one, overgrown and lined with briars. Malik ducked branches, wiped sweat from his brow, and stayed close behind Shadow, who moved with uncanny purpose, as if retracing a route he'd walked 100 times in his dreams. After 15 minutes, they reached a clearing. It wasn't large, maybe the size of their dining room, but light filtered in strangely through the canopy, soft and gold like sunlight pouring through stained glass. At the center of the clearing stood a stone, not a statue, not a headstone in the traditional sense, just a weather-worn slab of granite about knee-high, set into the ground with quiet deliberation. Malik approached slowly. There was no name, no date, only a carving. A single daisy, its petals etched with care, though many had faded with time. Malik knelt before it, heart pounding, breath shallow. Shadow sat beside him, tail still, gaze fixed. "What is this?" Malik whispered, though he already knew. He reached out and touched the stone. It was cool to the touch, and as his fingers traced the engraved daisy, he felt a pulse, not a sound, not a movement, but a weight, a presence, like the earth beneath him had inhaled. He looked around. Behind the stone, nestled under the roots of a tall oak, something glinted. Malik crawled forward and gently pushed back the leaves. There, half buried in the soil and tangled in roots, was a small hair clip, delicate, metal, and slightly rusted. He lifted it carefully. On the underside, scratched in small cursive script, was a name, Lillian. The breath caught in his throat. Shadow let out a soft whine, not of fear but recognition. Malik clutched the clip in his palm, fingers closing around it like a secret too fragile to expose. He looked back at the unmarked stone, and a dull ache spread in his chest. His father had searched for her. June had carried her, and now here she was, alone, hidden beneath the trees, beneath time, beneath generations of silence. Malik sat back on his heels. The forest swayed softly above him, and for a moment the world fell quiet enough that he could hear his own heartbeat. "You were here this whole time," he murmured. "Right behind us, just waiting." He placed the hair clip on top of the stone and sat in silence, head bowed. He didn't know what to say. There were no prayers for this, no tidy eulogies. Only breath and ache and the sound of leaves whispering overhead. After a while, he rose and took photos of the site from several angles. He marked the trail in his mind, memorizing each tree, each bend, so he could return. Shadow didn't move until Malik touched his collar. Then the dog turned without sound and began the slow walk back home. That night, Malik sat with Rochelle at the kitchen table and laid out the photos, the clip, and what he'd found. She didn't cry, she didn't speak for a long time. She just traced the picture of the daisy stone with her finger. "Lillian," she said softly. "He said she never made it." Malik nodded. "But she did. And she's been here all this time." Rochelle looked at him, eyes glassy but strong. "We're going to mark it, properly. No more hiding, no more forgetting. Like grief and peace braided together." In the days that followed, he researched county burial records. Lillian Ellis wasn't listed anywhere. No obituary, no death certificate. As far as the town was concerned, she never existed. But Malik had her name. He had the hair clip, he had the truth. And truth didn't need permission to breathe. One afternoon he stood in the clearing again, alone this time, and knelt before the stone. He placed a bundle of fresh daisies beside it and whispered, "I see you now." A breeze stirred through the leaves, brushing his cheek like a blessing. 3 days after discovering the unmarked grave in the woods, Malik was walking Shadow through the side yard when Mr. Halverston, their reclusive 80-year-old neighbor with the garden full of overgrown tomato vines and wind chimes that never stopped, waved him down from his porch. Malik hesitated. The old man rarely spoke unless absolutely necessary. His voice usually came out like gravel being raked across stone. But this time it held something gentler. "Boy," he called, "come here a second." Malik crossed the fence gate with Shadow trotting quietly at his side. "Yes, sir," he asked, wary but polite. Mr. Halverston didn't say anything right away. Instead, he turned and shuffled back into his house, motioning for Malik to follow. The interior smelled like old wood, pipe smoke, and something faintly citrus. In the front room, the man opened a drawer in a crooked end table, pulled out an envelope, yellowed, brittle, sealed with wax. On the front, in careful script, it read, "If someone ever comes asking about Lillian." Halverston handed it over without explanation. "That was given to me over 40 years ago," he said, "by a woman named June. Told me not to open it. Said it wasn't mine to read. Just to keep it safe in case someone came asking. Never thought someone actually would." Malik's hands trembled as he took the envelope. "Did you know her?" "Barely. She lived 2 houses down in a guest room at the Flanagan farm for a while. Quiet thing, sad eyes. She left one morning before sunrise, never came back. I always figured something happened to her." Malik nodded, throat dry. He thanked the man and left quickly, the envelope clutched tightly in his palm like it might vanish if he let go. Back home, he cleared the table in the den, sat down with Shadow curled at his feet, and broke the wax seal. Inside were 3 sheets of folded stationery, the ink faded but legible. The handwriting was elegant and unhurried. The first words made his breath catch. "To the one who finds this, if you are reading this, then it means the truth has survived all attempts to erase it. My name is June Ellis, and this is my confession, my apology, and my gift." Malik blinked fast, then continued reading. "When I was 17, I fell in love with someone I wasn't supposed to. His name was Raymond. He was older, kind, stubborn, and black. Why was white? In our town, that was enough to make love into a crime. My parents disowned me the moment they found out I was carrying his child. They said I had brought shame on our name. I left that night with nothing but a bag and the life inside me." Malik's pulse thundered. The story he had uncovered was only the surface. This was the heart of it. Lillian was born in a quiet clinic outside of town. Remember holding her for the first time and knowing instantly that nothing else mattered. But they wouldn't let me keep her. My father arranged for her to be taken, said it was for the best, that she would ruin me. I tried to fight, but I was a girl with no power, no name, no voice. They took her while I was still bleeding. Malik clutched the paper tighter, his eyes burning. Shadow let out a low sigh. The next page shook in his hands as he turned it. Years passed. I searched, I wrote letters that were never answered. Then I found out that Raymond had also been told she died. They lied to both of us. Said it was a mercy. But mercy without truth is just cruelty in disguise. Later, I learned the child was given to a family friend in secret, a relative of Raymond's. They raised him as their own. I believe that child was your father, Jeremiah. Malik sat back, heart slamming into his ribs. He skimmed ahead, breath catching at the lines that followed. Which means, if you're reading this, you are not just Lillian's nephew. You are my grandchild. Born of a love they tried to silence. But blood remembers. It always does. Malik's world tilted. The room seemed to sway. He looked down at the last page where June had written with an unshaking hand, "I leave this with hope, that one day someone will put the pieces back together. That my children, stolen and scattered, will find their way home to each other. Tell Lillian's story. And yours. Make them listen. Signed only, June." He sat motionless for a long time, staring at the pages, letting each word etch itself into the corners of his soul. Rochelle entered the room quietly, a dish towel in hand, and saw him sitting there. She didn't ask. She just sat across from him as he slid the letter over. Her eyes moved slowly, tracing each sentence like scripture. When she finished, she folded it carefully and pressed it to her chest. "They took everything from her," she said softly. Malik whispered, "They took everything from us too." Outside, the wind stirred the trees. Shadow looked up, ears forward, gaze turning toward the hallway once more. The following evening, Malik found himself alone in the house while Rochelle went to visit her cousin across town. The letter from June still rested on the table, flattened beneath a pane of glass like a relic in a museum. The living room was quiet except for the low hum of the old refrigerator and the occasional tap of tree branches against the window. Shadow lay curled by the front door, his breathing even but shallow, ears twitching every few minutes as if catching echoes that never reached Malik's human senses. Driven by a strange instinct, Malik walked over to the old cassette deck tucked between dusty cookbooks and a rusted lamp. He retrieved the cassette labeled "If Shadow Brings You Here," the one his father recorded and had changed everything. He hadn't played it again since the first night, but something inside urged him now. A pull that felt almost like a request, maybe even a test. He clicked the tape in place and pressed play. If you're hearing this, then Shadow did what I hoped he would. Malik turned toward the dog, expecting little. But Shadow snapped up, ears shooting forward, body rising from the floor like he'd been jolted awake from a deep sleep. His eyes locked on the cassette deck, then his tail began to swish, not in joy but with precision. He let out one sharp bark, then paced toward the hallway, back to the player, and then around the table, nose low, movements erratic but purposeful. Malik froze. "What is it, boy?" Shadow whined, spun once, then barked again, louder, more urgent. His nails clicked against the wood floor as he ran into the hallway and stopped at the exact spot where the mirror had once hung. He turned to Malik, tail rigid, and barked 3 more times. Malik stood slowly. The tape continued playing, Jeremiah's voice moving through fragments of thought and confession. As the line "She's still here, waiting for me to remember" passed through the speakers, Shadow jumped at the wall. Not to attack, not to scratch, but to signal. Paw touched the baseboard, then the corner, then back again. He circled once more, nose grazing the ground, then the wall, then the air, barking louder now, each time ending in a low growl. Malay's heart pounded. It was like Shadow was remembering something buried in the sound. "You know this," he whispered. "You've heard this before." That night, Malay couldn't sleep. Shadow stayed by the base of the stairs, eyes locked on nothing, breath tight. In the early hours before dawn, Malik logged onto his dad's old laptop, the one that had barely worked since middle school, and searched the encrypted archive his father once kept for military files and service records. He typed in a few credentials, tried 2 failed passwords, then finally broke through using his father's birthday and the word Daisy. Inside, buried beneath labeled folders and broken links, he found one contact, a retired staff sergeant named Thomas Keene, listed as part of Jeremiah's unit. With nothing to lose, Malik sent a brief email explaining who he was, what he had found, and a single question: "Do you know anything about Shadow's training?" The next day, Keene called. His voice was gravelly but alert, and he wasted no time. "You're Harper's boy?" "Yes, sir," Malik said, surprised by the call. "You said Shadow led you to something?" Several things, Malik replied. A grave, letters, and now this reaction to my father's voice. It's like he remembers. Keen went silent for a long beat. Then he sighed. That makes sense. What do you mean? Shadow's not just any dog, Keen said. He's the third generation in a very rare line of trauma-sensory canines. Not just sniffers for bombs or bodies. These dogs were bred and trained to detail psychological resonance. Malik's brow furrowed. Psychological what? Pain, Keen said. Specifically, unprocessed trauma. Grief that leaves behind an echo. Memory that's been silenced. These dogs can smell what we forget. What we try to bury. Shadow's grandfather worked with PO debriefings in Europe. His father helped with unsolved cases involving missing children. Your dad got Shadow after his second tour. Said he needed a dog who could help him find what was lost. Malik sat stunned. He never told us. He wouldn't have, Keen replied. He was assigned to classified work. But Shadow was part of it. I remember your dad saying once, "This dog knows what I'm scared to say out loud." Malik's throat tightened. So that's why, the grave, the tape, the hallway, Shadow's tracking patterns, Keen said. Scent markers from people, yes, but also spatial grief, places where emotional rupture occurred. That mirror you took down probably anchored some serious memory. It's where he always sits, Malik whispered. Every night. Then trust him, Keen said. If Shadow's still reacting, there's more to find. He hasn't finished his job. Malik thanked him, hung up, and stared at the dog now sleeping lightly by the front door. Shadow's breath moved slow and even, but his ears twitched with every creak in the house. Later that night, Malik sat on the floor of the hallway, the cassette playing softly again. Shadow lifted his head, then rose. He walked toward Malik, placed his paw gently on the floor, and let out a sound Malik had only ever heard once before. A low, mournful hum that wasn't quite a whine and wasn't quite a growl, but something between. A signal, a memory, The day after the phone call with Sergeant Keen, Malik sat at the dining table with Rochelle as sunlight spilled through the windows, catching on the worn wood and the half-finished cups of tea between them. A single daisy rested in a jar between their hands, cut from the cluster Malik had planted weeks earlier at the unmarked grave, now slowly blooming like a secret ready to be spoken. They had spent the past hour sifting through family records, handwritten trees taped together with yellowing scotch, and digital ancestry logs cross-referenced with county files. Every page, every name, had a gap where Lillian should have been, a space carved not by time but by silence. Rochelle exhaled, finger trailing the edge of an old birth certificate. We've been telling an incomplete story, she said softly. His time we fixed that. Malik nodded. We need to register her, officially, get her name recorded, give her back her place. Rochelle met his eyes and nodded. Then we'll need to go through probate records and heritage declaration forms, and we'll need a notarized statement from family. You'll do it, Malik said. I'll write everything. I'll tell the whole damn story if I have to. They spent the rest of the afternoon piecing together a dossier, copies of June's letter, photographs of the stone in the woods, Malik's DNA results, even the taped transcript of Jeremiah's confession. Each page, when laid out together, looked less like an archive and more like a living mosaic of a life once hidden. The clerk at the county registrar's office blinked twice when Rochelle and Malik arrived with a folder nearly 3 inches thick. We're here to request a historical recognition, Rochelle said gently, placing the documents on the counter, for a family member erased from public record. The woman raised an eyebrow but opened the folder. Her hands moved slowly at first, then with increasing care as she turned each page. When she reached the photo of Lillian's grave, marked with the daisy carving, her expression changed. She didn't smile, but her voice softened. This is beautifully documented, she said. It may take a few weeks, but we can initiate a supplemental familial recognition through the county. We'll make sure she's listed. Malik swallowed a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Thank you, he whispered. Her name is Lillian Ellis. That night, Rochelle pulled out the family photo book, the one that always sat on the shelf near the fireplace but hadn't been opened in years. It was filled with birthdays, graduations, hospital bracelets, and time-stamped smiles. Between the pages, she tucked a copy of June's letter and a new photo, a daisy bloom resting against the base of the unmarked stone. "Now she's with us," Rochelle said, her voice low but full. A week later, Malik made flyers for a remembrance gathering, printed with simple words, "In honor of Lillian Ellis. A daughter, a sister, a name returned." They hand-delivered them to neighbors and left copies at the corner store, the church, the town library. They didn't expect many to come, but on the morning of the ceremony, people arrived slowly, trickling in through the trees, stepping gently down the barely marked trail to the daisy clearing. Chairs had been set in a soft semicircle beneath the oak tree. A table near the stone held Lillian's photo, the hair clip, a handwritten copy of June's letter, and a small wooden frame inscribed with her name. Rochelle wore a pale yellow dress, the color of hope, and Malik wore his father's old jacket, the one Shadow always curled against. Shadow stood beside the stone, calm, poised, as if standing guard one final time. Among the guests were faces Malik hadn't expected. Mr. Halverston, his hands trembling but eyes steady. The Flanagan brothers, now gray-haired, who once rented to June. Even the old mail carrier, a wiry man named Everett, who confessed he'd delivered June's letters without ever asking who they were for. "I knew they mattered," he said quietly. They was enough. Malik stepped forward to speak. He didn't prepare a script. He didn't need one. "Lillian was my aunt," he began, voice rough but clear. "She was hidden from us, buried not just in the earth but in story. Today we bring her back, not just with memory but with presence." A breeze stirred the daisies, and for a moment, the forest seemed to listen. "We carry her forward," Malik said, "is every truth we uncover, every silence we break." He stepped back. No one applauded. There was only quiet, sacred and full. Then, one by one, people came forward and placed something at the base of the stone daisies. Letters, an old photograph, a crocheted baby shoe. Finally, Malik laid a framed certificate in front of the grave, signed and sealed by the county registrar. Lillian Ellis. Shadow lay beside it, tail brushing against the earth, eyes half closed, as if, at last, something had settled inside him. The morning came gently, wrapped in a hush that felt older than time. Light moved slowly across the walls of the house, brushing against picture frames and the backs of old chairs like fingers trailing through memory. The floor creaked as Malik stepped out of his bedroom, rubbing sleep from his eyes, still feeling the weight of yesterday's gathering pressed into his bones. The smell of damp earth lingered faintly in the air, mixed with the delicate trace of daisies he'd brought home, now sitting in a vase on the mantel. He expected to find Shadow curled on his usual rug near the front door, or pacing the hallway like he often did before sunrise, alert to something just beyond human hearing. But the house was too still, not dead, but hushed, a different kind of silence, a knowing one. Malik walked the hallway slowly, his bare feet brushing against cool floorboards. Then he saw him, Shadow, laying not by the door, not under the table, but in front of the wall where the mirror had once hung, the exact same spot. His body curled neatly, his head resting gently on his front paws. His chest did not rise, his eyes did not blink. There was no sound, just stillness. Malik dropped to his knees before he even realized he was moving. "Shadow?" he whispered. He reached out, hand trembling, fingers grazing the thick black and tan fur, still warm but unmoving. "Hey, come on, boy." No response, not even the twitch of an ear. Malik rested his forehead against Shadow's side and let the silence wrap around him like a blanket he didn't. Rochelle came down moments later, stopped when she saw the scene, and knelt without a word. Together they sat, surrounded by old walls and golden morning light, as the one who had led them through the forgotten passed into memory himself. They buried Shadow that afternoon, not in the yard, not behind the barn, but in the clearing beneath the daisies right beside Lillian's stone. Rochelle brought a small wooden plaque Malik had carved with his pocket knife in the hours after finding him. It read simply, "Shadow, the one who remembered." They placed it beside the grave, nestled into the roots of the oak where the sun filtered just right in late afternoon. Malik stood beside the new mound of earth, his hands buried deep in the pockets of his father's old coat, staring at the two markers side by side. One for the sister he never knew, and one for the dog who made sure he did. Rochelle laid a bunch of fresh daisies between them, her eyes shining but calm. He was more than a dog, she said softly. He was a keeper of stories. Malik nodded, unable to speak. They stayed there as the sun slipped lower, painting the clearing in hues of bronze and quiet gold. The wind picked up slightly, and the daisies around the graves swayed gently, like they were nodding in agreement. That night, the house felt heavier but not hollow. Malik placed Shadow's collar on the mantel beside Lillian's framed name and June's letter. The hallway, now bare and clean, held a different kind of energy, not haunted, not waiting but full, like something had finally come to rest. The air smelled like wood smoke and soil, and Malik didn't turn on the lights. He walked slowly, touching each picture along the wall, whispering names now spoken aloud again. As he reached the hallway where the mirror once stood, he stopped. The light outside cast soft shapes against the wall, and for a moment, he thought he saw the faint silhouette of a tail wagging. He smiled, closed his eyes, and listened, and then he heard it. A soft bark, distant and warm, like a goodbye riding the edge of a breeze. Not loud, not sorrowful, just a note of peace. Malik exhaled and whispered, "Thank you." In the days that followed, people continued to visit the grave. Someone brought a candle. A child left a drawing. The local paper ran a short piece titled "A Dog's Memory, A Town's Truth," and a copy of Letters from the was placed in the town library beside a photograph of Malik, Rochelle, and Shadow in front of the daisy tree. Malik took to walking the woods alone in the evenings, not because he felt lost, but because it helped him remember. Every twig beneath his foot, every branch he pushed aside, echoed with steps Shadow once took. One afternoon, months later, he found a new sprout growing beside Shadow's grave. A single daisy, blooming early, its petals wide like arms. He bent down and whispered, "You're still here, aren't you?" The wind shifted gently, leaves rustled, and somewhere deep inside him, Malik knew the story hadn't ended. It had simply been passed on, carried in roots, in wind, in names spoken after too long, in every echo of a bark that once pulled back the veil between what was forgotten and what was finally found. If this story moved you, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps us keep sharing moments like these. What part hit you the hardest? Was it Shadow's last goodbye? Or the moment Malik found the letter from June? And hey, where in the world are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, we'd love to know.